Welcome to the Jets UK podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andreas Groves. I'm joined by my co-hosts, David Wyatt-Hupton and Matthew Merrett. How you doing, guys?
Good.
All good, thank you.
Victory Mondays.
David, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you very much.
A little break. You're back for a Victory Monday. Even if it's one that we feel a bit mixed on after what we saw, it wasn't a great game, was it?
I mean, that was ugly. That was a boring game to watch. That is. On Saturday, I was saying the Ohio State-Michigan game kind of reminded me why I love American football, and this one reminded me why sometimes I can understand why people don't enjoy American football, because the quality on show was two bad teams, wasn't it? It was just two bad teams.
Yeah. Matt, how are you feeling?
All good. Feeling good after the win. It's kind of what we spoke about. It was a 2-8 team against a 2-8 team. And there were moments in that game where it felt almost like XFL, where the offensive lines on both sides were just completely outmatched by defensive lines. And as a result, neither side was really able to get any rhythm going. Fortunately for us, the Jets' offensive line kind of started piecing it together after a slow start all round. But it was a tough watch, but we're glad we came out to the other side and finally got that first road win of the season.
Yeah, it's good to get that win. It's good to get a win. Sometimes, a game when you're not playing well, you still pull out the win. It's good for a young team. Obviously, building around Zach, his performance wasn't great, but, you got the win around him. That's good for everyone involved, really. So these things are the building blocks towards success. Sometimes you have to learn how to win games you really don't maybe deserve to win, or no one really deserved to win yesterday. So I don't know what to say, because they were equally undeserving in winning the Texans. They were absolutely atrocious, weren't they?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's what we kind of spoke about, though. This is a Jets team which is young, it's new, it's got a lot of inexperienced players on the roster, and they need to learn to win ugly and up against the odds. And when you don't get perfect quarterback play, or you can't really establish an offense in the first half, or things just kind of fall against you, being able to grind out those results is so important. Because you look across the league, even the teams which are 8-3, 7-2, all of these good teams, they don't always win 30-6, 41-10. They have ugly wins mixed in there. We saw it on Sunday Night Football with the Baltimore Ravens beating Cleveland Browns. That's a milestone win for them as a team, but it wasn't pretty for them. It was tough going. It was up against a hard opponent, and they got it done. And I appreciate there is a step up for the Jets to make over these ugly wins happening against the Houston Texans, the teams you have to beat, but we hope it's part of the learning process for this team. We hope it's part of their kind of growth and improvement. And I think there were signs of that, and we can touch on these for other podcasts. But across the board, there were bright sparks. I think coaching looks better. I think Robert Saleh kind of managed the clock well. Mike LaFleur kind of played a good situational game in spite of some glaring mistakes on the field and missed plays. I thought the defensive line came to play. The cornerbacks, they kind of had a rough start and kind of started getting it together. So it's all of these little incremental stages which we hope will build onto something bigger over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, David, what's your thoughts? I know you were quite negative on Zach's performance generally. It was obviously something worrying to see. Obviously, nothing to, you don't want to raise alarm bells right now. It's obviously his return. There's lots of things that you can say, but it wasn't great, was it?
No, it wasn't great. And, I think it's important that you realise you don't have to be one extreme or the other. And this is kind of what I said on Twitter last night, is you don't have to love every single thing that Zach Wilson does, but you don't have to call him a bust after every mistake he makes either. Because he had a fair few mistakes. There was obviously a lot of rust there. I don't think the offense playing as well as it did while he was out has helped him that much, because, they've gone from being the number one offense over the last 4 weeks to then having kind of 70, 80 yards at half time against one of the worst defenses in the league. So that already sets the narrative up quite negatively. The positives, so talk about Zach Wilson's positives first. He did get into a little bit of the rhythm in the second half. I think Matt nailed it with the coaching. I think Mike LaFleur did a good job coming out of half time, scheming some of those guys open, giving more that middle of the field. They play a lot of cover too, and they sit quite deep, so having more nowhere to sit down and making him his first read was a good idea to get him in rhythm. The read option play was good. He fought through the tackles, dived for the line. When his knees 100% feeling better, structurally it's fine, but he said it was still not feeling 100% for him. When it's feeling 100%, I'd quite like to see a little bit more of that, because I think Zach does have that athleticism that we haven't really seen a massive amount of so far this year. But you can't look at the positives and completely ignore the negatives. There were a lot of negatives in there. The interception, it's one of those things you kind of say it happens. It does happen, but it's a bad decision. But chalk that up to an experience and a rookie trying to make a play, and it just not happening for him. He held onto the ball for too long. Again, that's becoming a bit of a concern. One of the sacks, I think he had it for 5 point something seconds. You can't get sacked after having the ball for five plus seconds. You have to get rid of it. If you can't make a play, get rid of the ball. Don't lose the yards. And that's something he's not learnt since he's been away. Again, multiple players out in the flat. He's missing them. Tevin Coleman over his head. Ty Johnson over his head. Braxton Berrios missed on a check down, which ended in a 3 and out. There's a lot of issues that are still there. Mechanically, he still looks pretty poor with his footwork. There is a lot of negative. It's hard to be realistic and not be a little bit negative about Zach so far.
Yeah.
I'm still not calling him a bust. I still don't think it was a mistake drafting him. I'm still hopeful that he will develop into the quarterback we think he can become. I don't think, some of these people saying, Aaron Rodgers is a ceiling, Pat Mahomes. It's just unrealistic to expect that kind of performance. DJ put out last night that Derek Carr is his ceiling. He sees that. And everyone's like, Derek Carr sucks. I'm kind of like, Derek Carr doesn't suck. Derek Carr throws 4,000 yards a year with 20 plus touchdowns.
I don't think the comp is very good, though. I think maybe the ceiling's fine, but the comp isn't maybe that accurate. I think
play style probably isn't. Probably isn't.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at ceiling in terms of statistical kind of outlook, if you were to say to me that Zach Wilson's going to become a player that throws for 4,000 yards a year with 23, 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, right now I'd bite your hand off.
Yeah, but he's not going to be that, because he's not going to have 23 and 10. He's going to, at his ceiling potentially, he's probably more like a 32 and 20 or something like, because the way he plays, he kind of gets the. He obviously
that's like
is
Jameis Winston type stat line.
Well, I don't know, maybe not as bad as that, but you know what I mean. Like he's going to be more. He's not going to be as conservative as that. Obviously, there might be a season where he does put it together, and he puts up plus 30 and around 10. But I think. With Zach, it's something we were talking about before, as we were setting up for the pod today. It's kind of like the things I heard about with John Beck on the sideline there to kind of calm him down, to kind of bring him back down. And the one thing that I'm looking at, I'm thinking, why is that he obviously has seen what has taken place over the last month with his backups coming in. He's taken that in. His, from everything you hear from the coaching, his film work, his studies, study habits is great. So you're thinking, why is it not clicking? Why isn't he not able to just process that in terms of actually trying to making sure that it happens and kind of replicate that, even if it kind of becomes a little bit too kind of limited. I think he's just everything. He's overthinking everything too much. He's trying to be perfect on everything, and he's actually overthinking, and I think it comes down to what we think. One thing I remember from the draft process is that he has ADHD, and I don't know whether that affects in terms of how he kind of processes things, not as in like actually in the game, but just the way he's trying to be perfect on everything, his study habits. I don't know if that is at all a factor at all, but I'm just trying to think why he is kind of the issues that he's having, in terms of like, because it's obviously for me it's a mental issue more. He can physically make those throws. He's not like he obviously he can make the throws on the field, so he can make the throws, close, and I know he can do that. So why isn't he doing that? Why isn't he processing? I think it's just everything's moving too fast. You said he's not trusting what he sees. Everything's moving too fast, and maybe that all that's coming into play, and all this is like all that together. What I've just said is like the reason why there's kind of mechanical issues, because it's all creeping in from where he is mentally. I mean, Matt, you're feeling a bit more positive about Zach.
I wouldn't say I'm feeling a bit more positive. I think it is important to preface it was a bad day. It was a bad outing, and he kind of spoke afterwards in his post-game preference about still not quite trusting what he's seeing on the field, which is kind of why we're seeing these hitches and this holding the ball, because he's at his best when he doesn't really have to think and he just plays in rhythm and in time and kind of gets the ball out in kind of the style of football that we're used to seeing him and that we want to see him play, with the quick releases and getting it out there. there's still a lot of inconsistency out there, but I think the narrative around it is quite interesting because there were a couple of plays which were close to going. If Griffin can come down with that pass in the end zone, which he should do, if Berrios takes that one to the house, if Elijah Moore doesn't slip on that first drive, any one of those could be a touchdown, and the kind of outlook could be slightly different, and it's not a million miles away. I think one of the things that didn't help his start yesterday was on two of his 3 first drop downs, he got absolutely rocked because of the offensive line. There was the one where Elijah Moss slipped, but George Fant just got beat inside out and taken to the cleaners. So Zach had no time to kind of move on to his second read and took a big hit. And then there was the other one where his helmet got ripped off and he had to throw it away, which meant we finally got a roughing the passer call, which was nice to see. So I think there are still those elements, those flashes, those signs which give you hope. It is this question of can he find the consistency that means we don't start 1-6 for 11 yards, and kind of we focus on that 14 for 18 that he finished on, or was it 13 for 18, something in that mix, and just building on those, because as Salah said when he was drafted, it's not his job to lift up everyone around him. It's kind of the Jets' job to kind of lift him up. And there still seems to be an imbalance there in terms of what's been asked of him sometimes. What's kind of the approach? How's it working? How's it kind of coming to life on the field for 60 minutes? Which needs addressing, needs kind of focusing from all 11 players who are on the field. So while I think it's fair to say that it was a bad game, and there are some people who are somewhat determined to write the story on Zach Wilson's career after 6 games. There are elements there. There are points where you can look to and be excited, but yeah, some of the concerns are not going to go away until he kind of shows a bit more than what we've seen.
Yeah, it's gonna have to play out, and for people to, he's gonna have to put it on film. He's gonna have to put it in performances for this stuff to go away, because right now the narrative isn't going away. And people who already want to write him off are looking pretty right at the moment. Obviously, them doing it right now after 6 games, after 6 and a quarter starts, is ridiculous. That in itself is why you shouldn't be saying it. But right now, everything you've seen from people who have been the detractors of Zach is kind of playing out. But that's easy to be seen in the first 6 starts. I think the whole Zach thing, we could talk about Zach and go through every play and go through each thing and debate it. Whether I know David, you're probably a little bit more negative on the Griffin play and put more blame on Zach than say me and Matt are. But these, you can break down every single play and work out who had what share of blame. I think it's just he has to do better. He has to be more consistent. He has to get the ball out quicker, replicate what his peers in the QB room were doing, and then play off that as you kind of get into a flow. That's where the game opens up a little bit more. I think he really needs to work on that and not trying to do too much from the beginning and be the superhero. He's still doing it. I think he's still trying to find the big play when he needs to just work on the kind of on the short game and work on that. So we'll see how that works out with obviously the Eagles game coming up. They've got a decent defensive line. Defense is pretty decent, but they obviously had a poor result against the Giants. So we'll see how that works out. If we turn our attention away from Zach now, just to kind of move on to the other teams, because I think the rest of the teams deserve a lot of credit because they were the one who actually won this game on the back of Zach struggling. And we'll go offensively, and then we'll switch to the defense in terms of if you want to take a positive and then maybe a negative from each. So David, do you want to shout an offensive positive performance or something that you saw positive from the offense?
Yeah, I think Matt touched on it in part about the Zach thing, is that the offensive line didn't start great. They did have a couple of really early struggles, but the second half and towards even the run game early, they opened up so many holes, and you kind of saw on Walter's run before the touchdown run. I think Moses, McGovern, and LDT all opened up an absolute mammoth lane where you could have drove a bus through it because they did such a good job, and we saw that all afternoon. They were opening up holes. I think Ty Johnson was running at 7 yards a carry. Austin Walter
he only got 6 carries though. Ty only got 6 carries, so
probably because of his pass protection woes.
Yeah.
But Austin Walter, he got 9 carries and he was over 4 yards. Tevin Coleman was up there as well. So, no matter who was running the ball, we were running it well, and that always speaks in favour of the offensive lineman. So I think we have found something in the middle in terms of the run game. LDT's had issues in pass protection. He hasn't been elite. He has been at GVR's level or just slightly above it. But in the run game, he's been significantly better, and that's where you're going to get your payoff. So I thought the offensive line as a whole did really good. I'm really looking forward to watching the tapes. I think AVT had a good game, but I don't want to say that until I watch it because sometimes looks can be deceiving.
Yeah.
But I did think the offensive line did a really good job. They actually protected Zach a lot better in the second half as well. We ran the ball a lot better, which kind of gets the defensive linemen on their heels a little bit, so they're not turning upfield with quite as much ferocity. So that does help. But that combination of offensive line player and Mike LaFleur's play calling, in that regard, that they are tied together. I thought he did. The zone runs worked really, really nicely. He used pulling guards quite frequently, which is a benefit. They could pull either side. So LDT can pull and AVT can as well. So you can't really key in on any one area. I just thought it was a really good showing. I love offensive line play. I love watching them go to work, and I just thought they did a really good job yesterday. And they helped the Jets be able to move the chains just enough to get that victory. So a massive portion of that W gets attributed to the offensive line for me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I completely agree that shaky start. I think it actually, as Matt alluded to, I think it did affect Zach, but Zach needs to get out of that. And I think he did eventually, but they kind of helped get that game back on track by kind of creating really good holes in the running game, and that running game was what we leaned on, over 150 yards, I believe, between all the backs. So good stuff from them. Matt, is there something another positive from the offense that you want to list?
I think broadly speaking about the offense, something which we perhaps sometimes take for granted when looking at the NFL broadly, but the Jets in particular have struggled with over the last couple of years is kind of just basic clock management. And I thought this week Salah and LaFleur kind of showed a much better grasp in terms of where they were in terms of the field, the clock, what they needed to do when they needed to call it. I think at the end of the first half in particular, I was quite impressed. Salah was aggressive with the running before they scored that touchdown and making sure that they didn't really leave too much time on that clock for Houston to do anything with. And then when Houston were kind of looking like that drive was petering out, he was still aggressive enough and had timeouts to spare to make sure that they got the ball back. It didn't quite pan out, but I think those are kind of the little things which show Salah is kind of learning as he goes as a head coach and kind of gives you optimism. I think similarly on that long drive in the second half, although they did kind of burn a couple of timeouts to get to them, those going for it on the fourth down calls was the right thing, and that kind of really nice play call by LaFleur to kind of give Elijah the end around to
really
get him
good
into
call.
space and get him going. So I think from a coaching point of view, I think that was one of my main positives from this week, and I feel like everything has to be caveated by saying we need to see it against better teams than the Texans, but after kind of being humiliated coaching wise in the last couple of weeks against teams like the Colts, the Bills, the Dolphins, it was good to see that kind of step forward and kind of gives you a bit of faith for moving forwards.
Yeah, I think it was important that they kind of it's still learning steps. I said, try not to burn all those timeouts. You get to the right decision eventually. Fine. Next time maybe you don't waste both of them, the timeouts. Because you got to make that decision quicker. You got to get that call down quicker. But the call was great. Like I said, it was a really, really, it was a kind of fourth down call that you really like. We weren't really used to seeing for quite a few years, where it was always like, oh, well, we'll just like overpower them and just run down the middle and get it. And then you'd be like, how often you get stuffed, and it's the most frustrating way. Like, at least if you try something different and it doesn't work out, at least you go, well, you tried to be inventive. And so, and get the ball, and I like the decision to not put the game on Amendola, obviously, where, he's another, he's another thing that we could talk about, but not put the ball on Amendola's shoulders. Give it to one of the best players, Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, you're going to get the ball and you're going to make a play and get the first down, and he did it. And so that's where you want the game to be in the hands of your more talented players and the ones that you really trust to get the win. So that was really good, even if they did waste a bit of time. Negatively, I guess in terms of the scoring, does someone talk about the Amendola situation, David? I know you like your kickers.
Love my kickers. Yeah, I mean he's got to a point now where he should not be the kicker next Sunday. You cannot miss as many kicks as he's missed. He's hitting under 70% now.
Yeah.
He's 2 from 8 over 40 yards. So he's basically making the chip shots and missing anything that's even remotely challenging.
Yeah.
He might be stacked like a bodybuilder, but if he can't kick a 40-yard field goal, then he's not going to last in the NFL very long. And I think the Jets actually did him a favor this week in that he missed 2 against the Dolphins last week, and they gave him an opportunity this week to come back and say, bad day. We all have them. Not every position player loses their spot based on one bad day. But Matt had another bad day. Not you, Matt. The other Matt had a bad day, and I think he won't be the Jets kicker when we host Philly on Sunday, and I don't think he should. We signed Alex Kessman last week to the practice squad. He probably gets a chance this week if we don't sign anyone else. But I think Matt said it best. Amendola can't be in the top 32 kickers in America right at this minute, and he can't. He can't.
No.
I mean, he seems like a nice bloke, but you can't roll him back out there again because Salah had no confidence in him.
No, they're coaching around him. They were coaching around him at the point, weren't they? The whole point of the fourth down play was like Mike LaFleur saying, "I've got to play for this." I'm like, all right, if you've got to play, that's better than what we got with Amendola, so let's go with it. And I think that's obviously what caused the delay there. But I think, it's a time for someone else to be given a go, because it's obviously, as soon as you hit that 40, as soon as the digit on the thing is at least 4 or 5, it's got a very low percentage chance of hitting it. It's everything.
And he pulled it wildly, didn't he? It wasn't actually a close kick. He pulled it quite vehemently wide.
So I just think it's obviously it's a mental game. He's got a great leg, but it doesn't really matter if you can't hit it through the uprights. You can hit it. If you hit it on the side, and it's halfway up the post, but it's 10 feet wide, it doesn't really matter, does it? So no. I mean, the defense has to be credited. They obviously came in. They've had obviously a lot of struggles this year. There's a few plays they would probably want back, but it doesn't matter who the opponent is. Pitching a shutout in for the second half to wrap up the game, impressive, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I really like how they bounced back as well. Bryce Hall obviously got beat on that Brandon Cooks touchdown, but I thought he came back in the second half and played a really good game. He had that tackle for loss. He had the pressure which forced the sack for Quinnen Williams. Yeah, he had a couple of plays in coverage. Even CJ Mosley was making a play in coverage, which I love to see. That dive in pass defense over the middle, which was great. I'm sure PFF will mark him down for style points on that one because he didn't look great doing it. But there was a lot to like about the defense. I think John Franklin Myers has to be the headline
JFM was great,
one sack in his last 6 games since signing that contract extension. The narrative was starting to build about how he'd lost motivation, how he'd got his money, and now he didn't care, and that didn't really ever show up on tape. I mean, the stats weren't there, but he still looked like he was playing the exact same for the kind of fire that he had. Obviously, it was a homecoming for him. He kind of grew up in Texas, so had a lot of family and friends there. But 2 sacks, interception, and do you know what? He actually looked pretty quick on that interception return. I thought he had some pace going on him.
Yeah, they needed to. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Collins or.
It was a receiver,
Cooks.
wasn't it? Yeah,
it was one of the receivers that naturally is going to catch up with him. But I tell you something, he got a good 35 yards on that or something like that. It was really impressive play, and it was good that he showed the stats. He has, like I said, he has been playing well, and I think something that Matt's been going on. Matt, not Matt Amendola. Let's clear it. We're not talking about Matt Amendola anymore. Matt, you've been going on about Bryce Huff being back or Carl Phillips coming in last week and pushing and getting JFM into a more comfortable role and where he can actually dominate, right?
Yeah, I think it kind of shows up over the last 2 weeks in terms of the uptick in his performance. Obviously, the Jets were put in a bad spot with injuries and kind of had to shift JFM outside just purely through lack of bodies. But having him back in the interior where he feels a lot more aggressive, a lot more powerful, you're really starting to see the benefits of that. I think on the defense on a whole, there are a couple of things. And firstly, the Texans kind of did us a great favour in terms of helping us keep this shutout in the second half because they just felt like they completely forgot they had Brandon Cooks on their team. It was very peculiar having. He's a top wide receiver who's just wasted in Houston, unfortunately, and it's quite sad to see almost. But the fact that they didn't use him in the second half at all really was mind blowing, even if it was to our benefit. I thought Quincy Williams played excellently in that linebacker role. He has flashes of being really, really a top player, and obviously it's still kind of quite a rough around the edges player. But his splash plays and his ability to close with his speed is so important. So hopefully he can kind of continue to develop, because it is a nice story. That kind of clip of him and Quinnen doing their synchronized celebration after his sack was something that we love to see.
It was good, yeah.
I think on Bryce Hall, something that I've been noticing over the last couple of weeks is, while he is an excellent cover corner, his ball skills sometimes lead a lot to be desired, and I think that's probably why we don't see him getting on the INTs as much. He doesn't really turn his head early enough and kind of lock onto the ball. He's very focused on the receiver and the receiver's hands rather than trying to make a play on the ball, which can be okay. But there were some opportunities where he kind of left out there, and you'd like to see him kind of make that step and kind of start making plays on the ball as opposed to just the receiver. So there's room for improvement on the defense. I think that's obvious, but particularly the second half yesterday, they did a good job, and it's something to be built upon for the running, particularly with a tough game next week against Philadelphia, who will look to exploit our weak run defense. So you're going to have to start thinking perhaps of how you're going to scheme and try and stop them, because they are going to try and run the ball down your throats, and you're going to have to ask big games. And one last thing, actually, I will mention, just because this is something that we've spoken about a lot before. On the Texans' first drive, I think it was, they had a 4th and 1, and they ran it straight down the middle for an easy conversion. And again, on that play, we had our backup D line in, and it's kind of representative of the Jets' commitment to just substituting in their whole D line for their first D line to the second D line. So you don't kind of mix and match or offer different looks. You consistently have 4 players on, 4 players off, and kind of rotate like that. And when it's 4th and 1, you need to have your top D line on there to kind of try and make a stop. There's no point just leaving people out on an island. You should have your best players in there, and that's kind of what you want to see. I appreciate that they're kind of saying that the scheme is very demanding on D linemen, and it is, but in those critical moments, you need your best players on the pitch.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting if someone did a breakdown of like comparing the two. When, the fact that they're subbing almost the whole line. It'll be interesting to see the breakdown of like the performance and the yardage conceded, and and the points conceded with under both units. So. But it definitely. The funny thing, like you were talking about Quincy Williams, yeah, he had a really good game, and I really enjoy his playing style, because I feel that he's the kind of player, he's got all the ability. He's just really rough around the edges, and you feel that over time with someone with like a CJ Mosley next to him with good coaching, Ulbrich Salah, good linebacker coaching, he's the guy that could potentially. If he can kind of work out some of these issues in his game, he could be a really, really effective kind of player next to CJ. There was that one play that just made me laugh. I was like, this is classic Quincy, where it was that tie rod run for like 30 yards, where like he just completely over pursued and was just like easily shoved out of the way, like because he completely got the wrong kind of. he was in play, but somehow he kind of ran past him in front of him and was shoved out of the way before Tyler run around the back of him. So it was like, oh, that's a classic play. When I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's 56. But overall, it was really, there was some good stuff there to be seen. And it's still a unit that's very depleted. And so the fact that they got a good performance against another team that isn't is talent devoid as well, that has to be said. But it's good. It's improvements, and hopefully they need to look at maybe something that the Giants did against Philly in terms of looking into next week, in terms of what they did. I don't know how much of that we can replicate in terms of the style of defense, but we've got to figure out something because we can't. They're running the ball. Until this week, they were running the ball so well, and we are so bad against the run. So that's not something they're going to have to look at that to try and replicate. David, anything else you want to say about the defense?
No, I think just to mimic kind of how good Quincy Williams has been. Like you're absolutely right. He is kind of like a a diamond that needs to be polished. I think he's got significant talent though. I'm surprised Jacksonville gave up on him so early. They drafted him in the third round in 2019, and they cut corners. But I guess we're doing something similar with a couple of our players. James Morgan obviously went, and one thing to probably touch on that we haven't touched on. It's not defensive related, but LaMichael Pirine, healthy scratch again in favour of Walter, who's just come off the practice squad. So Pirine's time with the Jets looks to be pretty close to an end, and if that's the case, that 2020 Joe Douglas draft class isn't looking overly good so far. So it's quite interesting to see that Walter was preferred. Obviously Walter was in San Francisco with LaFleur, so there is some familiarity there. Obviously they rate him to have brought him in. But yeah, seeing Pirine as a healthy scratch again, kind of almost with Michael Carter out, is almost a kind of nail in that coffin for his Jets career for me. I'd be surprised if he makes a comeback. He's fifth on the depth chart at the minute, so it's a long way back for him.
Yeah, it is. It was something that a lot of us saw as a potential that he was going to be the odd man left out. It seems like it's played out that way so far with Michael Carter, like you said, the guys who have started and played more of the snaps and all the snaps instead of him. So, I mean, that draft class is, a lot of people go on about it, and I know everyone says, oh, you can just, paint it that, Gase was the coach and you can just hide behind it as almost like a tongue-in-cheek thing because it kind of absorbs Joe Douglas of the blame. And I think that can't be 100%, but it has to be said that when you look at the two drafts, it's interesting to just have a quick conversation about those two drafts. If you look at those drafts and the way that the players that they got fit, they would say, okay, we want this kind of player, we want this kind of player. Every single player they got fit the scheme that they're fitting by and large, right? Look, AVT was a great fit, and the value, we are maximizing the value we gave up for him because he fits the scheme so well, all the way down to the Michael Carters. Both of them fit what they want to do so well, so we maximize that value. And I think that in that first draft, they didn't know what the kind of player they wanted, so they just was taking kind of guys who someone stood on the table for. Like, we need a running back. Okay, let's grab this guy. And I think like this year, it seemed to be way more like cohesive vision to really maximize the value, especially in the draft. Free agency, not so much. It hasn't worked out. But I think it would have, without some of the injuries, it might have worked out better if, people like Joyner and Lawson didn't get injured. It would have also played out pretty positively there as well. So I think that draft class is always going to be weird because of the way it took place with Gase still there and stuff, but you hope there was a few more hits there. I mean, Bryce Hall potentially, Mims, we'll see. Becton, let's see when he comes back. But it is one of those things. I've seen worse draft classes from better situations generally. So, but that young class of this year is doing pretty well, isn't it, Matt?
Oh yeah, this year's draft class is kind of everything you want to see and more. Obviously, it will kind of live and die by Zach Wilson, and that's kind of going to be the pick that this class is remembered for. But everything else is kind of panning out as expected. And obviously, this isn't to say it was perfect, because I don't think any of us would kind of go that strongly. But there are nice pieces and there are signs of encouragement. You kind of hope to see that continue and bleed through. I think giving Joe Douglas his full staff for a year, kind of exactly the processes that he wanted to run, kind of that step up. And I think in the 2020 draft, you got to remember he was with Gase. He was still with some of McCagnon's staff members and processes that they'd been running. And for a first-time GM drafting, having that in that COVID situation can't have been easy. And that run of 6 picks from Mims through to, I can't even remember, was the back end of the fourth. So there was Mims, there was Zuniga, there was Ashton Davis, Clark, Pirine, and James Morgan. That is a rough stretch. And then you added Braden Mann, who looks considerably worse than Thomas Morstead at the moment. But I guess on the flip side, if you find a number 2 corner in Bryce Hall and your franchise left tackle for 10 years, then it can be chalked up as an okay draft.
Yeah.
I think this year's one is obviously looking a lot more positive and kind of more of what we expected when we kind of brought JD into the building. So hopefully that kind of continues. Draft order is shaking up pretty interestingly, I think the Jets are currently picking 4th and 5th in the first round, back to back, and then I think the Giants have 6 and 7. So there will be 4 New York picks in a row, which will be fairly interesting.
Yeah.
So plenty of time. I saw there was a lot of love on Saturday for Aiden Hutchinson, who we've spoken about a bit before, who put on a pretty impressive performance. So there's plenty of time to kind of digest this upcoming draft class.
I think, David, one thing before we head off, talking about the draft class as we look forward and just the narrative of things online, we got to think about that. We want to win these games. We want to say, hopefully, that our top 10 pick is actually the Seattle one, right? and that our one ends up being in the teens because we've done some good things and we've won some games. And then there's good prospects, for anyone who's really locked in on Hutchinson or Thibodeau or any of those guys at the top of the draft. There is plenty of great options in the middle of the first round, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was making this point on Twitter. Yes, I think for a young team, and we allude to how young this team is, getting some victories on the board, getting that feeling of winning football games is far more important than top draft picks. I mean, we've picked pretty high for quite a long time now, and we haven't won too many championships recently. So it's not a direct correlation. You can find talent up and down the draft, especially in the first, second round, and especially this year, the 2022 draft is absolutely stacked on the defensive side of the ball. So if you're a team who needs defensive help, you're going to like this draft class, and a lot of it is in that middle of the first round. So, what I'd love to have Thibodeau, and while, the idea of Hutchinson's a nice idea, I have no problem winning another 2-3 games and picking 15th or 16th and having to settle for, I don't know, like a Nakobe Dean or a White from Utah.
Nakobe Dean Hive right here. I am leading the Nakobe Dean fan club at the moment, and it will not be settling at all if we get him. I tell you that.
That was a sarcastic settle. That was a sarcastic, because some people think if you don't get the top end guys, then you are settling for lesser talent, and that's not always the way the draft plays out. I mean, not every Hall of Famer, not every Pro Bowler goes 1 to 5. You get them all over the draft, and especially in the first round, you can hit on those. And I think
the best players
of
are
it is
that
I really
mid-first
want
round.
Tyler Linderbaum. So
yeah,
if we end up in that middle, because people keep saying, oh, you can't take him with the top 6 pick or top 7 pick or whatever it is. They're kind of like, all right, well, if we're picking 15th or we're picking 12th, 13th, then that seems to be the kind of ideal slot for him. So if we end up with 2 picks between 10 and 20 this year, I'll be pretty happy about that. And I think we can get 2 impact guys.
What do you think, guys?
Linderbaum and Dean are kind of two of my favourite picks. So
there we go. That's a Jets UK podcast favourite. Those 2 guys are going to be. We'll see. That's an early kind of. We know how you drove the AVT bus, David. Like that's you've been driving the Linderbaum one as well. So and now Nakobe Dean's another one to look out for. Really, really good linebacker prospect and would really help out in that spot. So yeah, I think we've kind of looked ahead a bit. I think naturally that's what you do. But yeah, this was it's the first time in a few weeks that we've been able to see a win. Obviously now this is Zach's second win. It wasn't as good as his first, but a win's a win. They learn from that, and hopefully it will settle some nerves, and he'll come back better against the Eagles. That's the hope. You have to have the hope, right? And we have to be calm. Let's just relax. So, guys, thanks for joining me on this one. We'll be back later in the week to speak to talk about the Eagles game. I'll be speaking with the guys from the Next Man Up podcast, which is the Eagles UK-based podcast. And so catch you later in the week. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time.